June 1816, snow low on the green Swiss hillsides, and out of that summer, two famous stories. A true account told calmly. Listen for one pattern, the thing arrives first, the name comes later. Let us start with the snow. In the first week of June 1816, snow fell across Switzerland, not on the peaks, but on the low ground, down to the shore of the lakes. On the 6th of June, it settled on green leaves and summer grass. Beside Lake Geneva, the same week brought gray, raw afternoons, cold enough to be written down twice a day. June in that country is a month of flowering vines and ripening hay. Nothing about it usually needs explaining. That year, the wrong things kept appearing in the landscape, quietly, one after another, and the people who watched them appear had no way of tracing them to a cause. The cause was real. It was already more than a year old, and it stood on the far side of the world. In April 1815, on an island in what is now Indonesia, a mountain called Tambora destroyed itself. The modern record ranks it as the largest explosive eruption in recorded history. When the air cleared, the mountain had lost roughly a third of its height. Where the summit had been, there was now a caldera, a vast volcanic basin, kilometers across, left behind when a mountain's top collapses. Many people on and around the island died. The sound was heard hundreds of miles away, and ash came down on ships and islands far out at sea. For months afterwards, sailors met floating fields of pumice, light gray, gas-filled volcanic stone, thick enough in places to slow a ship. On the mountain's flank, ash and pumice buried villages. An excavation in 2004 cut down through that layer and brought up carbonized timber and pottery, charred black by the heat. The cold that followed was not the work of one mountain, and the proof of that is physical. Drill into the snow at either pole and you can pull up an ice core, a long column of layered ice. Beneath the sulfur left by Tambora lies another acid layer, dated to 1809, a second great eruption from a volcano that has never been identified. The sun was passing through a quiet phase in those decades, near the tail end of the long cold period historians call the Little Ice Age. Together, they made the 1810s probably the coldest decade in at least 500 years. Across the whole planet, the cooling after 1815 averaged less than 1 degree. Averaged over the European summer, it was nearly 2. Both numbers are true, they are averages of different things, and the difference between them is where all the drama lives. A brief language spotlight. A caldera, the vast basin left when a volcano's summit collapses into itself, the eruption formed a caldera. Pumice, volcanic stone so light and full of gas that it floats, the sea carried rafts of pumice. And frost, the thin white layer of ice that forms on surfaces on a cold, clear night, frost whitened the June wheat. Notice how each of these is a thing you could photograph. Hold on to that. In this story, the things are always ahead of the words. A caldera, pumice, frost. The strangest measurement of that summer comes from Geneva itself, where instruments were read twice a day. The summer of 1816 was not a season of freak storms. The rain was ordinary rain. It simply set in, it began, settled, and showed no sign of stopping. When rain sets in, the sky commits itself for days. There were far more rainy days than usual, yet the rain, when it fell, was no harder than in any other year. In the entire summer, the clear, high-pressure weather that normally anchors a season appeared on one single day. Nothing violent happened at Geneva in 1816. The ordinary days themselves had been exchanged, all of them, for colder and wetter ones. The Atlantic made no difference. In Vermont, frost returned in the May nights while the field stood green. In June, elsewhere in the Northeast, snow lay on the ground. At the height of summer, ice formed on ponds and rivers as far south as Pennsylvania, an expression worth noticing. As far south as marks the outer edge of something's reach, and here the thing reaching was winter. People walked past water that had no business being frozen in the middle of their hay season. The names came afterwards. Later generations called it the year without a summer, or, in a grim rhyme coined later, 1800 and froze to death. The thing itself came first and stood in the landscape unlabeled. Meanwhile, in the Alps above the lakes, something larger was on the move. A glacier, a slow river of ice, answers cold years late, and through this period the alpine glaciers grew. Around 1820, one great tongue of ice came all the way down to the floor of its green valley. Even the mountains ran behind the event. And the explanations. The newspapers of Central Europe reached for comets, for sunspots, for the idea that the Earth itself was slowly cooling. Volcanoes and earthquakes entered the list as late as 1817 as a guess, with no mountain named. These were reasonable people, using the science they had. The name arrived last of all. Only in our own century did researchers add Tambora's veil of sulfur to their models of 1816, and even now, their strongest sentence is a conditional one. Without the eruption, a summer that cold would have been highly unlikely. Now put a household on that reigned in Lakeshore. In June 1816, the poet Lord Byron moved into a house above the village of Cologne, on the slope over Lake Geneva, the Villa Diodati. With him traveled his personal physician, John Polidori, who kept a diary. Staying nearby were friends, among them the young woman the world would later know as Mary Shelley. 15 years afterwards, she described that summer as wet and ungenial, the incessant rain often confining the party to the house for days. Her account was written long after the fact, and not every detail in it can be checked. The surviving records do not even agree on how many people sat in that room. In her telling, "We will each write a ghost story," said Byron, and of the company she wrote, there were 4 of us. Polidori's diary turns the recollection into a date. The entry for the 17th of June 1816 ends, "The ghost stories are begun by all but me." One line, written on the day itself by a man in the room. Handle even this with care, though. The notebook we can read today is not the original. Decades later, a relative copied the diary out by hand, left out the passages she judged improper, and then destroyed the manuscript itself. So the sentence survives the way a fossil survives, as an imprint in someone else's material. In this story, even the primary sources arrive secondhand. A second spotlight before the story's turn. A glacier, a slow-moving river of ice, the glacier reached the valley floor around 1820. When weather sets in, it settles and stays. The rain set in and the party stayed indoors. As far south as marks the outer limit of a reach, ice as far south as Pennsylvania. And one phrase you will need in a moment, to appear under someone else's name, to be published as if another person had made it. Keep that one ready. A glacier set in as far south as under someone else's name. 2 stories left that house, and both traveled ahead of their names. The first appeared in January 1818 in an edition of 500 copies. Frankenstein, published anonymously, with an unsigned preface. Anonymous publication was normal enough at the time, but the interval is worth saying aloud. The book existed for 5 years before a title page carried Mary Shelley's name in 1823. The other story fared stranger. On the 1st of April 1819, a London magazine printed a tale of an aristocratic vampire under the running title, The Vampire, a tale by Lord Byron, with an unsigned letter from Geneva placed ahead of it. The tale had been developed by the physician, Polidori. It went out into the world under someone else's name. The correction came at once from the author himself. In the next monthly issue, dated the 1st of May 1819, the same magazine printed Polidori's letter. He claimed no theft. His words were careful. "Though the groundwork is certainly Lord Byron's, its development is mine." So the error did not go uncorrected. To go uncorrected means to stand with nobody ever putting it right, and this was put right in print within a month. And yet, in that same May issue, the magazine's own list of new publications still carried the entry, The Vampire, a Tale, by Lord Byron. Byron, in Italy, wrote to a publisher in Paris that the tale was not his. That letter survives only in copies, so his denial stays in our words, not his. His own publishers then printed the ghost story he really had begun at the lake, unfinished, headed with a date. June 17, 1816, the very day of Polidori's diary line. Within 2 months, every account agreed in print, and still the tale traveled under the borrowed name. Translations, stage versions, and opera in 1828, and later literary vampires cut to its pattern. A century on, reference books told the affair both ways. Correction is fast, labels are slow, and a label in motion tends to stay in motion. One shape holds it all. The snow, the ice, and the glacier arrived within a year. The names ran years, decades, centuries behind. 3 questions. 1. What does an ice core prove about the causes of 1816? 2. If the rain at Geneva was ordinary, what had changed? 3. What was corrected within a month, and what still went uncorrected? That was the year the things came early and the names came late. Listen once more with subtitles on, and let the 8 expressions settle into place. The pictures in this episode are AI-generated illustrations, not historical photographs, and this voice is synthetic. Thanks for listening.